Hi, and welcome to Speak On. I'm your host, Yolanda. I'm joined by photographer and activist Eliza to discuss Cheer Up Love, her amazing photo series released in 2017 that retells the stories of street harassment, and her new podcast of the same name. Hi, Eliza, how are you?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
I'm all right, actually. A little bit tired today, as I had so much stuff to sort out, and I'm getting older. You know, these things, they wear on me. But how has, the question that everyone is asking, how has 2020 been for you?
It's been very strange, obviously, like for
Hmm.
many people. It was obviously like quite stressful at the beginning of the pandemic.
Hmm.
I was living in a different country. I was living in New York at the time, and then
Oh,
I
wow.
actually had I was visiting London for work in March, and then I got stuck here during the lockdown, and then I had to basically pack up all of my life from here and get it all shipped back, and so that was a bit stressful, like relocating during a pandemic,
Yeah.
and then but ever since then it's been obviously an adjustment period, but
Hmm.
there have been some, I guess, nice surprises. I think in the way that I've work has sort of changed a bit, and with the podcast and being able to kind of I mean, I've been trying to look for the positives basically during this time, and I think the positives have been that my practice has been it's had to adapt, and so
Hmm.
instead of doing lots of like real time shoots, I do FaceTime shoots, and I've now started working in different media like podcasting, and so it's been a journey, just figuring it out like everyone else, I guess.
Yeah. And then are you relieved? Because you said New York, and I went, oh, are you relieved to be here compared to New York? Because obviously things
Yeah.
were got really, really bad there.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I would not have wanted to have been locked up in my minuscule apartment away from all
Yeah.
of my family and friends during the like the epicenter of the pandemic. And I was like everyone who I know who lived in New York just got the hell out of there at that time, because things were pretty rough. They were like, you know, body bag trucks on people's roads and stuff,
Mm.
and it was not the place. It's not the city to be trapped in your apartment in, like
No, because
at all.
they have no room, do they? Those apartments are so small.
Like the way that New York works, and the kind of like deal that you make when you move to New York and you pay so much money to live somewhere
Hmm.
incredibly small, is that you're not going to be spending any time living in that tiny place that you're
Yeah.
spending lots of money on. You're going to be enjoying the city and going to bars and working and seeing friends and stuff. But when all of that is taken away from you and you're just like trapped in your tiny apartment
Hmm.
with a really hellish pandemic, and also I didn't have any health insurance,
Oh God.
so
Yeah.
I'm a freelancer, and I'm self-employed, and so really appreciative of the NHS, because it is so expensive over there
Yeah.
to have health insurance, and I was just like, I'm just gonna wing it while I was there. And then
Yeah.
when the pandemic happened, I was like, okay,
No more winging it.
no
Time to go
more.
home.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Home is calling. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm so glad that I'm glad you're here for it and not stuck in New York and not stuck in your apartment, and that you got everything sorted out. Are you planning to go back? Well, I say after, whenever after is, because obviously that's like how long is a piece of string. But
Yeah.
will you return?
I don't know. It's hard to say at this point. I was kind of I was at the time I was like, oh yeah, I'll be back in a couple of months, and then this now, or like recently I've been like, oh yeah, I'll be back in spring next year. But now I'm just like, oh, I've got no idea what's going on. It's so hard to plan for anything. So I'm
Hmm.
just not planning at the moment,
Yeah.
because and I'm just trying to take things day by day. And yeah, my the way I'm looking at it is that like I'm really not going to plan for the future, because I just have no idea what's going to happen. And being self-employed anyway is pretty hard, but kind of
Hmm.
establishing yourself in a completely new country at this time and looking for work is even yeah, that's something else completely. So I'm just taking it day by day, and I have no idea really.
Yeah. That's fair enough. That's fair enough. So, what do you feel is kind of I suppose, the best lesson that you've learned so far in 2020?
mm, I would say the best lesson that I've learned so far in 2020 is that you adjust to things quicker than you think you will,
Hmm.
and you can adapt yourself, and kind of you can learn new things about yourself and new ways of working. That, I mean, okay, so for me, for example, I have been quite rigid in the way that I work for a long time, and I sometimes feel scared about doing new things or trying new things sometimes with my practice. But what this year has shown me is that you can take risks and you can try new things out, and the world's not going to end, because I mean the world, it literally is ending, but you just working in a different way, or adjusting your life, or just changing things, like it's not going to be like detrimental to you as you really think it is. And I think it's been kind of a good time to get outside of your own head in a way, and basically just try new things, because really you've got nothing to lose. I mean, also you have everything to lose, so it's a tricky one. It's a tricky one. There's a lot to lose, but there's also nothing to lose in that sense, because you're sort of we've been inside all the time, and I haven't been able to do any of the normal things that I would have been doing. So I guess in that sense, it's been a really good chance. It's been good for me to do new things.
Yeah. And I think what you were saying there is like, it's good to try new things, etc. But you obviously already have this like amazing level of bravery, because, I mean, I wanted to talk about Cheer Up Love and just kind of that whole thing. There's so much bravery. So it's interesting to say that's the main thing you've learned, because I'm thinking, wow, I felt like you'd always been in that space of being able to push yourself and try new things and do all these things. So it's interesting that you're learning that that you still have a way to go within that as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'll be the first to say that, like, I'm continually surprised and surprised by the way that Cheer Up Love has gone, and the different formats that it's taken, and also just the way that I work and the way that my practice has unfolded, and the way that my career has completely changed over the years as well. And it's just hasn't been linear in any way, shape or form, and planning things has been really difficult, because then something else has happened that's just completely changed the course and direction of my life in a way. So the whole thing has really just taught me to be open, I think, to new things. And then this year especially, because I think I was getting a bit like set in my ways about certain things, or like how things should look, or like, I don't know, all of that kind of stuff. But I think it's good to challenge that and take risks with your work.
Brilliant. Okay, so now we'll go over to talking about Cheer Up Love. So some of the listeners may not know what that is. They may not understand much about it. So can you give us an overview of what it is, and like what inspired it, and also what have been kind of the main like benefits and outcomes from it?
Yeah, sure. So Cheer Up Love is a photo campaign that I began in January 2017 that retells accounts of sexual harassment and street harassment, and it's done through photography and story sharing. And the process of what I do is that I photograph people in the place that they experience sexual harassment, and use that as a stage to speak out on, whether that is a bus stop or a train station or a busy street. And the aim of the game is really to turn a negative situation into something positive and reclaim the space and the experience. And it all started on social media, and then kind of branched out to working with different organisations and doing lots of offline work. So I do lots of talks and workshops. And then in 2018, I partnered with the United Nations and went on a mission to Sri Lanka with them. So it started off as something like a project I did on Instagram, and it still very much is a project I do on Instagram, but it has now branched out into like lots of other different kind of avenues.
Brilliant. And then what's would you say kind of are there kind of any like big outcomes in terms of, like with Gina Martin, there's like legislation changes and things like that. Have you had any kind of impact in that sense, or is that on the books? Is there something that you kind of want to tackle next?
Yeah, so for me, it's like the reason that I started it, and the reason why I was so inspired to do this, was because I wanted to raise awareness about sexual harassment, and do it through a creative lens, and do it in a different way, in a way that I felt comfortable doing it, because I didn't approach the subject of sexual harassment from like an intellectual or like studied perspective, because I went to art school, and I have this weird thing where I'm like, oh, you know, I don't have the authority or knowledge to speak about this, or to go into legislation, or to go into politics, or any of this kind of stuff, because I don't know how, because I just went to art school and all of this sort of stuff, which is a classic case of like, you know, imposter syndrome, like detrimental talk, all of that kind of stuff. But it made me focus on the things that, like, my strengths basically, which are creating a project, working in a creative way, photography, design. And so for me, it was about, okay, how can I communicate this issue that I really care about in a way that makes sense to me, in a way that connects to me, and the way that will connect with other people. And so for me, the kind of most important thing was being able to make that connection, but in a creative way. And so that's kind of why I went down the route of making it a photo campaign. And I'm really passionate about things changing, about legislation, about all of this kind of stuff, but I'm more sort of interested in collaborating with other people and kind of being able to use both of our strengths to do that. So for instance, I worked with Gina Martin in 2017 on her upskirting campaign. I photographed her campaign, and that was like a real honor to be even involved in that in the slightest. And then I'm working with like Our Streets Now at the moment, who have a campaign to make street harassment illegal. And so I've like always thought about this, like, you know, when I was doing the project, and I had lots of people asking me the same thing, like, you know, are you going to start a petition, or are you going to make a legal thing, or are you going to go into this, that and the other? And I've wanted to do those things, and I'm passionate about those things, but I'm also kind of playing to my strengths. And I think collaborating with other people and using my skills and working with other people and, you know, being able to join forces, I think is even more powerful. And also there's only so much you can do as like one person, which I'm now learning so much. And I think that's also something which I've learned from this year, which is that it is important to collaborate with other people and to work with other people, and you will benefit and flourish so much more than just kind of working by yourself. And that's something which I've been doing quite relentlessly for the past 3 years, is just working completely by myself. But there's such a beauty in collaborating with others, and especially others that kind of have the same vision as you. And that's been something really incredible that I found like online with like communities on Instagram and on social media and stuff. So yeah, that's been really great.
Yeah. That's amazing. There's so many good things have come out of that. And I think, you know, I was looking over the campaign, and I remember at the time, it's like, you know, it's just like when Abby, who's our producer, brought up, like, we were talking about what can we talk about in future podcasts. And then she brought up Cheer Up Love, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'd completely not forgotten about it, but I was like, oh yeah, I remember this. I remember us having conversation about this, because I remember having conversations with other people who were really surprised as to how often catcalling happens, what counts as sexual assault, what is harassment, and so many people were really confused and didn't know where the lines are. So how many, I mean, you must have had these conversations endlessly now, but what's your kind of stock answer for when people say, okay, what is like sexual harassment, what constitutes as this, you know, what's the problem with catcalling? Do you have a kind of a stock response that can help people really understand? Because it is so normalized. A lot of these things are normalized.
It's so normalized, and I think that's also been like one of the biggest backlashes to the Me Too movement, was when everyone was like, well, you know, what actually constitutes as harassment? Like, can I not say hello to anyone anymore, and all of this kind of stuff. And I think there's so much there's so much of confusion within this like grey area where people just don't, where a lot of people find it confusing between what's the difference between like having a conversation with somebody and then flirting with somebody and all of this sort of stuff. And I think where it's different is that people have, or like think that they have good intentions, but they will not understand the kind of reaction or like to their actions or the impact that their actions will have. And so a lot of people will say, well, I was just trying to flirt, or I was just trying to be nice. And it's like, okay, so those were your intentions, and that's fine. But also, it doesn't really matter what your intentions were if you are actively doing something which is making somebody uncomfortable, or you are acting in a threatening way and something. And like a lot of people say, oh, well, it's just a joke, you know, and like, oh, why are you taking it so seriously? It's just a joke. And it's like, okay, you may have thought that was a joke, but like really kind of analyze the actions that you've taken here and analyze how it's made that person feel. And then if that person isn't finding it funny, then was it really a joke? Yeah. But I don't know. I've had so many different answers to this. Sorry, I've had so many questions about this, and lots of different like reactions to my work, especially with people being like, oh, you know, what's wrong with telling women to smile, and it's a nice thing, and cheer up, like it's a compliment, like all of this sort of stuff.
I don't understand how it's a compliment. Just mind your business and leave my face alone.
Because what about it is complimentary? Like it's just it's just not a compliment at all. And basically it all boils down to kind of unwanted sexual attention, and also just like a lack of respect. And people just, I think there is an extremely clear difference between somebody paying you a genuine compliment, or just asking you a respectful question in a respectful way and treating you with dignity and not just as a sexual object, than there is with somebody, you know, shouting good tits at you from across the road. Like there's a very, very clear difference when about that kind of things. And then people ask, well, what about in the workplace? Can I not sort of, you know, touch someone's knee or someone's shoulder, or will I get in trouble for giving somebody a hug? And it's like, you really just have to analyze your position, like, of power in those kind of situations. If you are the boss and you're going around hugging all of your female employees, that might not look so good. If you're just a colleague and you're at the same level with another colleague and you're friends with them and you're having conversation with them and, you know, you give them a hug, which is reciprocated, and obviously, like, you know, they are like you know your colleague and you're on the same kind of level of power and your friends and all of this kind of stuff, then you shouldn't have so much to worry about in that regards. But like, it's just being able to kind of look at a situation, analyze it. Are you dealing with somebody respectfully? Are you giving are you giving someone unwanted sexual attention? Like it's it basically for me just comes down to like the basic like level of respect and treating other people respectfully and not in a sexualized way.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely some lessons to be learned in how people conduct those kind of conversations. Because when you brought up Me Too there, I remember when that came up again, because obviously there have been times in the past where it's come up, but then there was a particular point where really everybody really got hold of that conversation and that topic. And me and some of my friends were like, we should have conversations with like men in our family and kind of ask them if they understand what any of this is. And so we all kind of went off, had conversations with our dads, our brothers, etc., and in family groups. And one of my friends actually said she had a bunch of family round, and then she started talking about it, and some of the guys in her family were like, oh, what are you talking about? This stuff doesn't happen. And she was like, okay, every woman in this room, you don't have to say what's happened, all our, like her family, like her grandma was there, everything, like tons of them. She was like, put your hand up if you have had unwanted sexual attention or you've been assaulted or anything like that. And every single woman in that room, including her mum, her sister, everyone, all of them put their hands up, and the guys were so shocked. They were so separated from it. And then that really sparked a conversation of what is harassment, where does it, what happens here. And when I've had conversations about it with people, and like with them, I work with influencers and mainly female influencers, and we have lots of conversations about this, because they're getting, you know, people are commenting, people are saying stuff in the street, they get so much harassment, so much catcalling, it makes it sometimes impossible to walk down the road. And we were talking about, what is it that guys have problems with when you are trying to explain to them that they don't need to say anything to you.
Yeah.
And there is that kind of, I think you've said it there, like that level of respect. And if they don't know what that level of respect is, how can we, I don't know, what can we do next to kind of teach men, young boys, people, how to flirt or how to talk to people so that they're not confused? Like, what do you think we can do?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's just about kind of introducing kind of positive relationship, like positive gender relationships from like a really young age, and being able to kind of educate about things like this, about sexual harassment, like at a young age, and like be able to talk about it and have open dialogues and conversations about, you know, what is wanted and what is unwanted sexual attention and consent and all of this kind of stuff, which conversations which just not, well, I certainly didn't have them when I was at school. We only really got told about the worst possible case scenario, and everything few and far in between was just, it was just like, oh, whatever, boys will be boys. It just wasn't really a conversation that was had. And I know it's being had now more and more, like more than ever. And there are really amazing initiatives that are doing kind of work to get it into the curriculum. There are initiatives like the Good Lad Initiative, which is all about kind of promoting positive masculinity. And then there's like the new sex education program, which is being rolled out soon, which is definitely better than it ever has been before. But there's still so much work to be done. And I think a lot of it boils down to being able to have these conversations from a younger age, being able to teach boys and girls about respect, about consent, about positive gender relationships, and also know how to kind of take a rejection without it turning ugly. And I think that's one of the huge problems with a lot of the harassment that we see, a lot of catcalling, a lot of relationships, like anyway, when there's this kind of unwanted sexual approach, and then the girl or the woman or whatever will say, oh no, I'm not interested, and kind of reject the advances. And then the rejection instantaneously turns into an aggression, turns into like, oh well, screw you, blah blah, you're not that fit anyway, you're ugly, all of this kind of stuff. And being able to kind of teach people from a young age about healthy rejection, about how, basically just that you're not entitled to anything that you want and that you see, and basically that all just comes down to kind of dismantling the patriarchy, I think, like bit by bit, because as for so long men have been able to get away with anything really, and it's all kind of been brushed off and shoved under the carpet under the guise of boys will be boys, and that's just men being typical men. And now women finally are turning out in the numbers to say, oh, okay, I'm actually really fed up of this, because I know, I just can't take it anymore. And then men are turning around and saying, oh, well, we've been acting like this forever, and now you're suddenly saying that our actions are wrong. Yeah. And I think it's about time that those actions were challenged.
Yeah. And I've had I don't know if you've had any guys that you may know saying, well, what am I supposed to do when I like someone? How do I flirt? What do I say? What do you say to guys of your own, like your own peer group, when they ask you things like that?
Well, the thing is, it's not that women don't want to be flirted with. It's not that we want to break down the lines of communication between men and women. We want to encourage communication between men and women, and healthy communication between them, and in a way that's not sexualizing. And if you can flirt with somebody, you can be so flirtatious without being sexual. And that's like one of the main things, is to kind of look at the person that you're talking to as an actual person, as a human being, not as a sexual object. And sure, you can think about them as a sexual object. Everybody does. That's great. But you don't have to vocalize it. You don't have to make that person feel instantaneously uncomfortable. Because, and also, it's obviously extremely dependent on the scenario. It's going to be a lot easier to have that kind of conversation with somebody that you maybe know, or in a friendship group, or at a party, or at a bar, or in a club. What is a lot different is having those conversations like on the street, I think. And ultimately, I mean, I'm just saying this for myself, but I don't want to be picked up on the street. There's enough pickup artists going around trying to like lure women off the streets, and it's just not, I don't know, it's just not it's not an environment where many women feel very safe, I would say. And so if you're truly like 100% want to pick somebody up, don't do it on the street. Like, do it in a public place. Do it in a safe space. Do it somewhere where the other person can feel, unthreatened. And I just think, like, obviously, lots of people will say, well, this is like the death of romance and the death of kind of spontaneity and all of this sort of stuff. And it's like, sure, you can still be spontaneous, you can still be romantic, you can still be all of these things, but you can do it in a way which isn't threatening and creepy. Like,
I mean, what relationship ever started with nice tits?
Precisely, exactly. Like, there's no relationship ever started from a catcall or from someone being told to cheer up on the
exactly. Why don't you just smile? Oh, thank you so much for saying that. I'll give you my phone number and then we can get married.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
it
I
doesn't
think
feel natural.
The people who are worried about flirting maybe haven't actually experienced what it is like to be sexually harassed. So for a lot of women, when we're talking about being sexually harassed, we're talking about, guys rolling down their car windows and asking us to get in their cars, making sexual gestures, shouting horrible, crude things, slapping our asses, putting their hands up our skirts, like all of this kind of stuff. And obviously you can have, interactions as well, which are disrespectful and sexual and all of this stuff, which are just completely verbal. But it's basically being able to bring it back to that basic level of respect.
Yeah.
And that's all what anybody deserves, regardless of your gender. If you're flirting with a man, if you're flirting with a woman, if you're flirting with anybody, it just comes back to having that human decency and treating them like an actual person and not as a sexual object.
Yeah, absolutely. So then, we're talking about people shouting out cheer up love, which I'll be honest, so I was speaking to Abby about this when we were prepping for the show. And it's like, I don't get huge amounts of catcalls. It was more so when I was younger in really specific parts of London where guys would come and like talk to you. So they weren't shouting things out. They would come and they'd be like, oh, can I talk to you? And then, don't get wrong, it was a little bit irritating because you're trying to walk down the street, but it wasn't, they were still actually just asking you a question. It wasn't just screaming something at you from across the road. And then if you're like, no, I'm not interested, some people get it, some people don't, some people are more persistent, and that in itself is a huge problem. But I don't kind of get that thing. People, I don't know if I just look unapproachable. I think as well, sometimes there's definitely divisions when it comes to race as well and how men approach you, etc. If anything, definitely. I get kind of stupid things like where people genuinely, will shout out like, hey sister, or they'll say something so incredibly fucking cringe. That's the kind of thing that I would get, but I've seen other people get incredibly like really badly harassed. And actually one thing that's just popped into my head, working with influencers who are their models, so you'll go into a shop, you'll go into a department store, you're going to see their face everywhere, the face of like huge international brands. Men will take pictures of them a lot, like right in front of their faces, or they'll stop and they'll stare and they'll start following them even when we're in groups and stuff, and it's really, really terrifying for them. And they don't necessarily get people saying anything. They get men, their kind of physical behavior becomes really creepy. But one thing that when I've discussed kind of just like how 2020 is going for them, a lot of them have said, well, brilliant, I'm wearing a face mask, so no one's told me to cheer up and no one's told me to smile, because no one can see my face and no one can see my smile or not. But I've looked, looking online and reading different reports about what's been happening this year, despite the fact that people can only see our eyes, so they're leaving us alone more. There have been reports that sexual harassment and indecent exposure in public have actually got worse in lockdown, and has gone up, like paramedics are getting it, people on the street, people in supermarkets. Like, what have you heard any stories about things that have happened in 2020?
Loads. So Plan UK did a study and found that 1 in 5 women and girls had experienced sexual harassment during the pandemic. And I've heard loads of stories of people being harassed with face masks on, and there's one story which I actually read on this account called Cute Cat Calls, which is a really good, really amazing illustration account. But there was one of these stories which someone shouted at someone, do your knickers match your mask? Which just really says it all for you. And I've also heard stories, but then it's there's two sides to it. I've heard stories of people say, oh well, I've actually felt a lot safer during this time because the streets have been emptier and I've had my face has been covered, so I feel more sort of like anonymous maybe, or just inconspicuous, and like draw less attention to myself and all of that sort of stuff. And I see that side of it, but then also I've heard loads of reports of the entire opposite, of people kind of using this as using the pandemic as like an opportunistic as an opportunity to kind of for like more things to like pick out about somebody. So like using like the face mask to be like, oh, I wish I could see your pretty face and all of that sort of stuff. And just and then like personal space is also another thing, and people have been abusing that and using that to kind of scare people, and then the whole like outer threat of coronavirus and everything like that. And so there's just so many different kind of levels to it. And like I myself have experienced street harassment during lockdown, and it was really frightening because before I hadn't really thought about it before, and I was actually thinking oh, like, you know, the streets are so empty, this is great, like there's no one around, like this is pretty weird, but also yeah, I feel kind of safe because there's just no one here. And then I remember I was walking home one day and I was on like a really busy, what was once like an extremely busy road, and I was just waiting to cross a light, and then like a big van like parked up at the light and then started like beeping their horns and like rolled down the window and was like shouting things at me and started like following me, and there was no one around, and I just felt like extremely vulnerable. That would have never have happened. Well, I mean, it might have happened, but there would have been so much like less accountability. Basically, there was no accountability whatsoever because there was no one there to see, no one there to who could have maybe like acted as a deterrent. The busy road was completely empty. It was just me and this like one, you know, guy in the van, and I felt like, okay, well, the streets are empty, great, but if anything did happen to me, I'm pretty screwed because there's no one around and I'm like running home now. So yeah, so that was the moment where I was kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, no, it's still happening, it's just worse now because you're more vulnerable and more alone.
Yeah. Well, gosh, that's such a good point because, you know, I've lived in London for ages. And when I'm home when I'm in my hometown, my mum's like, where are you going? What are you doing? Even though I'm a full adult. But then when I'm here, obviously she's not asking what I'm doing every second of the day. But then when I'm traveling, or sometimes she'll be like, are you going to be safe? Are you okay? And it's like, actually, you know, you could be out at midnight in London and it's as busy as like 11 a.m.
Yeah.
But actually during this time, yeah, it's like, it's, you know, it's some depending on which area you're in, it's like dead, isn't it?
Yeah, it was quite spooky in that regard. And even traveling on public transport again, when if I found it quite spooky because it would just be really empty and it could just be like you and one other person in a tube carriage, and you only ever really experience that like when you're on like the night tube or on the night bus and it's just you and one other person, and that is like, you know, quite terrifying. And one of the kind of amazing things about London is, as you said, it's normally extremely busy, and if that's no deterrent to harassers whatsoever. Like harassment happens all of the time, but you usually in some cases feel like a little bit safer knowing that there are more people around. That's why people don't like to walk down, you know, dark streets. They like to walk down well-lit streets and stuff when they're going home, and it's why, you know, you're told not to walk down, you know, alleyways and stuff when there's no one around. Like you generally feel safer when you're in a busier place, even though harassment happens whether it's busy or not busy. But that's just like a huge thing that I found from the pandemic and all of the stories that I've been hearing over the past couple of months coming in. And there's definitely been an increase to street harassment.
Yeah, my goodness. People, I don't know, it's all so wild, isn't it? We know these things happen, but my goodness, this year we could have done with just a few less things happening, right?
Yeah.
It's been a really stressful time. And actually, you know, this year has really shown so many gender equalities, things that we know exist all the time. But, you know, things like when people have been working from home and homeschooling, and a lot of people I know who are married with kids, etc., the women have the disproportionate amount of like work to do because they're looking after the kids and they're working and they're doing the schoolwork while their husband is locked in an office. And there's that. I've seen quite a few articles as well talking about that gender inequality. But also another thing that came up as well was Chris Evans accidentally posted a video on Instagram, and it accidentally, I suppose, showed a screenshot of his general kind of photos feed from his phone, and in there's some racy images that he's clearly privately sent to someone.
Yeah.
You know, I'm upset that it wasn't me, but okay. But it was particularly, you know, the reaction was shocked initially, and then all his fans gathered around and they were like, we're gonna absolutely flood the hashtag with pictures of him and a puppy. You know, him and puppies, him doing good things, him in these really, really specific kind of positions. So he kind of looks, you know, so it makes him wholesome again because he's Captain America. He's wholesome. This was an accident. He shouldn't be penalised. But years ago, when I want to say maybe about 2006-07 time, hundreds of celebrities' clouds were hacked including Jennifer Lawrence, Selena Gomez, Kirsten Dunst. There were loads of them. And then there were loads of faked images as well that were shared at the same time. And all these things were leaked. And there were so many thought pieces and so many people saying, why is this person taking pictures of themselves? Why are they doing this? The women in particular, because men's accounts were hacked too, but the women were attacked so vehemently. And I do want to say, oh, it's a different time. That's why they were attacked then. But then Chris Evans is being helped now. But we all know that if that was, say, Selena Gomez that had done that now, then she would have just been dragged through the mud and no one would have been rushing to fill a hashtag.
Of course.
You know, what do you think about things like that? How do you think we can start to get past, obviously dismantling the patriarchy is at the top of the list.
Yeah.
But how do you think we can start to get past these gender inequalities, in particular when it comes to things like your body, sex, and these images that are yours?
Well, yeah, I mean, as you just said, like there's one standard for men and then a completely different standard for women. And that's always been the case. And I think people think that has changed, but it really hasn't, because there's even more media scrutiny than ever before. I heard that, I'm not sure if it's true or not, but apparently Meghan Markle was the most trolled woman in the entire world in 2019. No, not woman, sorry, the most trolled person in the entire world in 2019. And there's just always has been this completely different standard for women to uphold. And you've seen this with all of the kind of recent scandals, with the phone hacking scandals. You've seen this with even like the Harvey Weinstein case and stuff. And like when victims, it's all about like victim blaming basically. And so when these nudes are leaked, everyone asks, well, why did she take them if she didn't want them to be seen, you know, and all of this kind of stuff. And that's just victim blaming. It's the same thing when, you know, women just aren't believed on face value, whereas men are. And like when the Harvey Weinstein scandal came out and 1 or 2 women spoke out, no one really cared. It took literally 100 very successful celebrities for anybody, A-list celebrities, to pay attention. And also like very wealthy, white, slim, successful women for this kind of message to get out. And this message has been trying to get out. And like when you think about that and you're like, well, how did it take that many people to just make everyone believe that this one man was guilty? It's because there's just 2 standards basically. And like if it was the other way around, like imagine if that was the other way around, you know, it would take one man to call something out for things to be taken seriously basically. And I think it basically all comes down to the fact that we're still battling this complete inequality and like this weird like societal distrust of women. And it's a constant questioning of women and their actions. And it's really, it fires me up. It makes me very depressed. It makes me very angry. And because I see it, like you still see it all of the time, like the shaming headlines of like tabloid papers and the way that the tabloids like scrutinize women and women's bodies. And like, yes, they do it to like men as well to a certain degree, but just like nowhere near.
No, it's not. It's
nowhere near.
It happens to men too, but I'd say I feel like it's with men. It's like with women, it's like 1,000%. With men, it's like 20%. It's like 20% of the energy towards that, and it shouldn't be happening to any of them. Yeah,
like 100%. And like even recently with the like whole Emily Ratajkowski, oh my god, I cannot pronounce her second name.
Ratajkowski? No.
Ratajkowski.
I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, Emily.
Yeah.
But the like article that she wrote for The Cut recently about kind of her new like the photographs of her that were leaked and her having to kind of like buy back her images, and then everyone saying, well, you know, you shouldn't have taken the photos first if you didn't want them to be shared. And there was this whole thing of this photographer kind of like abusing her when she was very young and she was starting out to be a model, and then taking photographs of her that were supposed to be for one magazine, and they were quite like I suppose like sexualized photographs, but there was like an agreement that they'd just be shown in one magazine, and then he ended up kind of, you know, going in a complete different direction and like publishing books and like whole books and albums of it and having exhibitions of all of these really intimate photos that he'd taken of her. And, you know, the response wasn't like, oh, you know, poor Emily for her kind of images being used without her consent and all of this. It was more like, well, you know, she obviously loves the attention and she posed for them, so she wants it. And, you know, just your standard victim blaming, shaming agenda.
And people don't realize, like in those situations, they don't realize as well how, you know, working with models and everything for so long, they don't realize how predatory people, like not all photographers, I'm not saying every photographer, there are lots of but there are a lot of photographers, a lot of male and female photographers, and they're really predatory when people want to break into modeling or whatever else, or early days, or they're told you're so pretty you could be a model, etc., and they groom them. They don't realize how predatory that is. And actually a lot of people think I would never succumb to that, these people shouldn't be taking the pictures. They don't realize that the difference between them and you is that you just didn't meet that person first. They don't realize how people like that, their minds work in order to put and get people, and women especially, in those vulnerable positions where they're taking these pictures. They don't realize at all.
Yeah, exactly. And like also what people don't realize is that in all of these situations there is a power dynamic, and in all of these situations they have also been taken completely out of context. And so when you're reading about one of these things in a newspaper or something, you're just like seeing the sensationalized headline, you're just thinking like, oh my god, you know, like, well, what did she expect? And I've heard loads of people say, you know, when the whole nudes, like celebrity nudes being leaked and stuff, I've heard loads of people say, well, you know, if you didn't want them to be released or like shown to anyone, like why did you take them in the first place? And it's like, because it makes me so angry. I can't even finish my sentence. But
people can't see the steam coming out of your ears, but I can.
Yeah.
Well, because people don't realize it's personal choice. You can do what you want with your images and your body. There is no justification for that. You know, Jennifer Lawrence, anyone else, they don't need to explain anything. You don't have to say anything. You could do what you want.
Exactly.
But it's people, somebody stole it and then they were still blamed, and that's what's crazy. And then when there are, you know, again, there's a really specific case of someone that I worked with a really long time ago, and when she first started her career, she was approached by this photographer who was so old compared to her. And I'm really saying age here because age is a real factor in these things. It's power, and age combined with power. Oof. He was so old enough to know better, has children and daughters that were the ages of the models he's shooting, and he is shooting these really, really, really unnecessarily racy pictures with these girls that want to be models and everything else, under the guise of we're gonna use it for this, we're gonna use it for that. Then he owns their pictures. He's got them to sign these kind of crazy contracts, which actually they don't realize they've signed away the rights and the usage of these images pretty much forever, doing things like paying for domains in their name just in case they become famous, and then he won't release the domain even though it's in their name and stuff. And it's, the whole thing is disgusting, and it's predatory. And people don't realize it's not just there's not just this, like you're saying, that so much of it's out of context. People don't realize what the truth is behind it. You know, where people are targeted, or they're given money, or under the guise of it being a job as well. Some people are like, well, I thought I was just doing a job and doing this photo job, and I was paid not very much. And then the whole thing is just, it's a trap, and they don't realize.
Completely. And it's just, it's power, as you said, but it's also control. And if you've got the control over somebody's image, and if you're controlling somebody's body, you're ultimately, it all just boils down to the possessing and controlling of women's bodies in this way. And you can apply that to all kind of things. You can apply that to like catcalling, to sexual assault, to people's images being leaked, to women being body shamed and fat shamed and in the media. It all just boils down, and like, you know, like being able to have the right to choose if you want to have an abortion or not, like all of these kind of things. It's a huge spectrum, and there's lots of different kind of ways that it rears its ugly head, but it's all basically under the same guise of controlling women's bodies and then shaming them for their actions.
And it's like, well, this entitlement has to stop. We have to, like you were saying, we have to absolutely start dismantling the patriarchy to stop this entitlement over other people's bodies and other people's decisions. It's absolutely insane. Yeah,
it's pretty crazy. And I think it's pretty, I think there's a way of doing it that we really need to focus on. I think there's such a danger now with the issue being so polarized that so many people are kind of turning away from it, and there's people are treating the word like feminist as sort of like triggering buzzword and all of this kind of stuff. And I think so many people and men are feeling threatened and feeling attacked, and the conversation is just being like split down the middle. And I know some people who during the whole Me Too saga were like, oh, this has gone too far, and like, don't you think it's gone a bit too far, and these men are losing everything, they're losing their reputations and their jobs, and
I can't.
and it's just gone, this whole feminist thing, this whole feminist propaganda, this whole witch hunt, it's gone, and that word was thrown around everywhere, witch hunt. It's just gone way too far. And there was a point where everyone was on board, then suddenly everyone was like, okay, you've had your 5 minutes, we don't want to hear it anymore. And then now it's become an extremely sort of polarized thing to speak about. And I just think we need to try and find a way to bridge that gap and to have these conversations without it turning into like just complete like talking to someone on a different planet, which is what it feels like now. And I heard a statistic that young men now are kind of more sort of turned off by the idea of feminism, and like I wish I could remember what the statistic was, but it was something like, it was a huge statistic, like young men think that feminism have gone too far, like between like 18 to 25 year old, like most 18 to 25 year olds think that feminism has gone too far, and like all of whatever, that was a terrible retelling of a statistic. But that just kind of goes to show that we need to try and like engage people into the conversation without like pushing them away, and it's a really hard thing to do, obviously, when any conversation starts to happen, the media starts to sensationalize it and pit people against each other, and put people into their different tribes and so on. And especially now when everything seems to be dividing down the middle with like politics and identifying as like a liberal or as a whatever. And so, we just need to find a way to balance the playing field again, and just have these conversations in a way which is not going to switch people off. And I hope that is something which I can do with the work that I'm doing. But
I hope so. That's a really good point, because I think as much as I used to be a journalist, that's what I trained as, that's what I was, I've worked in media literally since university, but I'm very aware of the power of it, and I'm very aware of the divisive nature, especially now, even more so, more than ever. And this divisiveness does come from a place of people feeling power. Their power is being threatened, obviously, by the press still very much being a patriarchy as well. So there's like, there are agendas, and the problem is there are these nuanced conversations are happening, and there are, people like you putting out work in a specific way that makes things understandable and approachable. But then as much as it's great when you get like, there's great things when the media kind of are elevating things and shedding light on particular stories, when you get the sensationalist part of the media adding these wild headlines and people aren't reading it, they're just reading the headlines, and then it's like, that's it, it's all gone too far. And you've made such good points there about people's reactions to Me Too and feminism kind of going in these other directions. And I think really, I suppose maybe one of the main things we have to battle, I think that's kind of the root of a lot of stuff, is the press. And I'm saying this as a person that's an active member of it as well. We genuinely think about it. Whenever government have part to play in anything, but who is then reporting what the government is saying? Who's reporting what people are saying? It's someone else coming along, making it all exciting because of the 24-hour news cycle and commercialization of the press, and throwing it out there to be consumed in this way that's actually really damaging. And that's what's causing this massive divide. There's nothing in the middle anymore, is there?
With every single issue, with politics, with feminism, with trans rights, with gay rights, with literally, and with race, with anti-racism, like Black Lives Matter, like all of these things are being used as tools for the press to just like pit people against each other at the moment. And it just feels like everything now, it's either like, well, you're on this team or you're on this team, or you're this person or you're this person. And it almost feels like it just feels so heated whenever you have these conversations, because you're automatically like, okay, what tribe are you in? Can I change your mind? And are we going to see eye to eye on this? And it just is starting to feel pretty hostile, I think. But I think the media has a huge part to play in that. And when it comes to even like narratives of headlines and things like that, and that's a huge issue I have with the press sometimes, is the kind of way that they frame cases of like assault and rape and stuff. And you always hear things like, a woman was raped on a like in a dark alley, or a woman has face punched in on bus, it's always pitting the woman as the victim, the woman as the person who is receiving the assault in some shape, form. Okay, I'm like losing my words completely here. But the headlines never read like, oh, a man punched a woman in the face, or a man assaulted a woman, or a man raped a woman. It's always like the woman is receiving, like is the recipient of this abuse. The woman is the one who like got herself into that situation, and it's just like it's a really victim blaming narrative, and it's a narrative that just like needs to change. Like especially like even with the Prince Andrew stuff, it was like Prince Andrew kind of used to sort of entertain young girls. It was like, no, like he was a child rapist. Like say it how it is. Like there's just very cunning way that the media uses narratives that to change people. Uses these narratives and wordings and things to just like manipulate how people think about these situations and stuff. And I think it's amazing now that a lot of people are calling it out and saying it as it is. And there are loads of accounts even on Instagram which are like kind of, there's this one account on Instagram which is called like the right headline, or I
know what you're talking about. The one that basically just fixes the headline.
It fixes the headline. What's they called? I've completely forgotten what it's called. But it's like it's an account which is just dedicated to posting these headlines and then just like crossing them out and just rewording them and then putting them back in the order that they actually should be, which doesn't like put all of the blame onto one specific person, or not one specific person, but just kind of like rewording the narrative to what it actually should say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a really, really good point that you made there. It's that making the victim the recipient and never focuses on the person that's delivering it. And so therefore if you would take them out of the context and out of the frame of it, not that we need to demonize them, but we're not even seeing them in the narrative at all. So it's not even focusing on, well, who has done this? Why have they done this? What is it that they've done? It's not even, it's all victim. It's never...
It totally it creates like this blameless individual, this blameless perpetrator, because they're never even mentioned in the narrative. This person who has committed this crime or this act, like they are never mentioned. It's always the victim has the most like emphasis, and that in a sense is damaging and detrimental, because everyone will be thinking, well, like what have they done to get themselves into that situation, or what, like that's just the way that it goes, unfortunately.
So Abby was just saying, is it fixed it headline or something?
I think
like
it's
that?
Yeah. I think that is it.
Yeah, and that's it. Yeah, fixed it headline. There's actually a few different ones as well that are like that, and they're so good. And it literally just puts the line through it and then writes everything the way it should be.
Exactly.
And the narrative really does have to change. So, I mean, this has been an awesome chat. So I could talk to you for so long. There's so many things that we could both sit here and vent about. What are you working on at the moment? What have you got coming up? What should people be looking out for next with you, apart from alongside your awesome podcast?
Yeah, so I mean, the main thing I'm working on at the moment is my new podcast, which is the Cheer Up Love podcast, and it's all about like dismantling myths and interviewing different artists and activists and talking about like debunking myths around sexual harassment. And so that's like one of the main things that I've been working on at the moment. But I'm also working on a few campaigns coming up with actually a bit secret, so maybe I shouldn't have actually said that, but but yeah, I've got some exciting stuff coming up, and I'm not going to say anything else because I think actually maybe it's secret. Yeah,
no worries. Thank you so much. And where can you be found online?
So I can be found at Eliza Hatch on Instagram, and at Cheer Up Love on Instagram too, and cheeruplove.com.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Eliza. This has been awesome, and I hope you have an awesome day.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Speak On. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share with your friends, family, co-workers, strangers in the street. To find out more about us, including our upcoming events, head over to Instagram, instagram.com/speakon_. Bye!